Have you ever felt like you absorb everyone's emotions, like the weight of the world is pressing on your chest, and no matter how hard you try, you just can't switch it off? That's the life of an empath. But what if I told you that there's a version of yourself waiting on the other side of all that emotional chaos, a version so powerful and free that most people wouldn't even recognize it? Carl Jung called it facing the uncomfortable truth within ourselves, the shadow we try to hide, and for healed empaths, this shadow becomes the very thing that fuels their strength. In this video, we're diving deep into what truly happens when an empath heals, not just surviving, but transforming into someone who feels deeply without being consumed, someone who turns sensitivity into power. By the end, you'll see why empathy isn't a burden, it's a secret superpower, and why the path to mastering it is both thrilling and uncomfortable. Stick with me until the end, and if this speaks to you, hit subscribe or drop a comment sharing your own experiences, because trust me, this is the conversation every empath needs to hear. Most people think of empaths as gentle souls, constantly tuned in to the feelings of others, absorbing joy and pain alike, almost like emotional sponges. But the truth is far more complex and far more uncomfortable. Beneath the surface of that sensitivity lies a shadow that most empaths never confront, a part of themselves that they've spent a lifetime ignoring or suppressing. Carl Jung called this the shadow self, the hidden side of the psyche that carries all the thoughts, impulses, and emotions society tells us are unacceptable: anger, jealousy, resentment, fear, and even the desire to protect oneself at the expense of others. For many empaths, these feelings are terrifying because they're not only taboo internally, but they're also amplified externally. Empaths instinctively absorb the emotional energy of those around them, which often masks their own suppressed emotions. Imagine carrying not only your own unresolved pain, but the unprocessed feelings of everyone you interact with. It becomes a pressure cooker, and the shadow quietly grows in the background, influencing decisions, relationships, and even self-worth. Confronting it is excruciating because it forces the empath to acknowledge feelings they've been trained to reject. The anger they feel isn't wrong. The resentment that rises when they've been taken advantage of isn't a moral failing. It's part of their humanity finally asserting itself. Healed empaths, however, reach a point where they no longer avoid this inner darkness. They stare it directly in the eye, accepting that these emotions exist and that they are not only normal but essential. This confrontation doesn't happen overnight, and it is far from comfortable. It often begins with moments of intense self-reflection or experiences that shake the empath's understanding of themselves, sudden betrayals, unanticipated conflicts, or even the realization that they've spent years living in a way that prioritizes everyone else's emotional reality above their own. By facing the shadow, the empath begins to reclaim ownership over their emotions, distinguishing between what belongs to them and what has been absorbed from others. They recognize the subtle ways their avoidance of anger or resentment has shaped their behavior, how passive compliance, chronic people-pleasing, or guilt have limited their choices, and slowly, painstakingly, they integrate these suppressed aspects into their conscious self. It is here, in this integration, that transformation occurs. The shadow is no longer a source of shame or fear, it becomes a teacher. The empath learns to understand the origin of each suppressed feeling, how it interacts with their sensitivities, and how to process it without being overwhelmed. Anger, once terrifying and unacceptable, becomes a signal to set boundaries. Envy evolves into clarity about what they truly desire. Resentment transforms into insight about where they've been giving too much of themselves and how to redirect that energy without guilt. Most empaths never do this work. They continue to absorb and suppress, never realizing how much their unexamined shadow controls them. Those who do, however, are never the same. They emerge with a profound sense of emotional freedom, a clarity that allows them to engage with the world without being consumed by it. They no longer need external validation to feel whole because they have acknowledged and accepted every part of themselves, even the parts that once felt dangerous or bad. And perhaps most importantly, they begin to see the shadow in others without judgment, cultivating compassion that is grounded in understanding rather than mere emotional mimicry. This is the turning point where sensitivity becomes strength, where depth of feeling no longer equals vulnerability, and where the empath can finally exist as a fully integrated human being, powerful yet tender, aware yet grounded. The shadow is not a curse. It is the gateway to the most authentic version of an empath, the part of the self that had to be faced to truly step into wholeness. For most empaths, life begins as a constant flood of emotions, not just their own, but everyone else's, washing over them like an unrelenting tide. Every interaction, every encounter, every stray glance or word can leave an empath emotionally drained, and for years this can feel like a curse rather than a gift. They absorb anger, sadness, frustration, and even joy, often without knowing which emotions are theirs and which belong to someone else. The untrained empath becomes what many describe as an emotional sponge, endlessly soaking up the energy around them, leaving them exhausted, overwhelmed, and sometimes even confused about their own feelings. But the story doesn't end there, because this is only the beginning of a journey that, when pursued consciously, can transform vulnerability into extraordinary power. Healed empaths learn something remarkable. They are not simply vessels to hold the emotions of others. They are alchemists capable of transforming raw emotional energy into insight, creativity, and resilience. This transformation begins with awareness. Instead of automatically absorbing the waves of emotion around them, a healed empath first recognizes what they are feeling and where it is coming from. They develop an instinct for distinguishing between external energy and their own internal state, which allows them to step back and observe without being swept away. Once this awareness takes root, the next step is conscious processing. The anger they sense in someone else doesn't have to ignite their own rage. It can become a lens to understand the situation, a signal for boundaries, or a spark for creative problem solving. The sadness they encounter doesn't have to drag them into despair. It can awaken compassion, deepen empathy, or inspire art, writing, or music that speaks to the human experience. In this way, the raw emotions that once felt like a burden are transformed into tools, instruments for growth, understanding, and expression. Over time, this mastery becomes second nature. A healed empath begins to navigate the world not as a passive receptor of emotional energy, but as someone who can consciously absorb, transmute, and release it. Emotions no longer overwhelm, they inform. Sensitivity no longer drains, they empower. This shift is subtle at first but profound in its effects. Creativity flourishes, relationships deepen, and decisions are made with clarity rather than confusion. What was once a source of suffering becomes a source of insight, giving the empath the ability to read situations, people, and even societal patterns with uncanny precision. In essence, they become emotional alchemists capable of turning even negative or chaotic energy into something useful and even beautiful. The process also fosters resilience. When an empath learns to transmute energy, they no longer fear emotional intensity or uncertainty. They recognize that they have the tools to handle anything that comes their way, to convert it into wisdom or strength rather than letting it erode their sense of self. And this is why the journey from emotional sponge to emotional alchemist is so transformative. It is not about shutting down sensitivity or becoming detached, but about learning to wield it with intention. By consciously engaging with their gift, healed empaths move through the world with a sense of empowerment that few can truly understand. Their presence becomes magnetic, not because they absorb everyone else's energy, but because they exude a calm mastery born from deep internal work. They are able to connect with others on a profound level, offering insight and understanding without being consumed, inspiring trust and respect in ways that are subtle yet powerful. Ultimately, the shift from sponge to alchemist is not just a personal transformation, it is a redefinition of what it means to feel deeply. Instead of being overwhelmed by the emotional currents of life, the healed empath learns to ride them, to shape them, and to use them as a source of creativity, clarity, and power. Your empathy becomes your superpower, but only when you learn how to transform it, and that transformation begins the moment you stop being a passive receiver and start being a conscious, intentional alchemist of the human heart. For empaths, one of the most radical and transformative steps toward healing is learning to set boundaries, a concept that sounds simple in theory but feels like an impossible act in practice. For years, many empaths live as though their lives are porous, constantly allowing the emotions, problems, and demands of others to flow in and shape their own sense of self. They say yes when they want to say no, overextend themselves to help, and silently carry the weight of responsibility for others' happiness, believing that this is what compassion truly requires. The irony, however, is that this very overextension often leads to resentment, burnout, and a profound disconnection from their own needs and desires. Healed empaths discover that boundaries are not just necessary, they are life-changing, a radical act of self-preservation that transforms the way they interact with the world. At first, saying no feels foreign and even selfish. There is a sense of guilt, as though refusing someone's request is a betrayal of empathy itself. But as they practice setting limits, empaths learn to recognize a profound truth: boundaries are not a rejection of others, they are a declaration of self-respect. By defining the emotional space that belongs to them, healed empaths stop losing themselves in the lives of those around them. They no longer feel obligated to solve every problem, absorb every emotion, or carry the weight of everyone else's expectations. Instead, they create a protective space that allows them to engage fully, intentionally, and compassionately without being overwhelmed or drained. The world predictably resists this new approach. People who were accustomed to the empath's endless availability may feel surprised, frustrated, or even offended when limits are drawn. Requests may be denied, complaints may arise, and subtle pressures can mount. Yet the healer knows that true freedom does not come from pleasing everyone, it comes from honoring the self. There is a deep, almost counterintuitive liberation in this resistance because it forces the empath to confront the reality that their worth is not measured by how much they give or how selflessly they serve others, but by the integrity with which they navigate their own boundaries. Over time, the act of saying no without guilt becomes a powerful tool of self-mastery. Healed empaths develop an inner clarity that allows them to distinguish between situations that require compassion and those that demand protection of their energy. They become adept at noticing when they are being pulled into unnecessary drama, manipulative dynamics, or emotionally exhausting situations, and they respond with calm intentionality rather than reflexive absorption. This skill does not diminish empathy, rather it refines it. By refusing to overextend themselves, empaths can offer presence and support from a grounded place, making their compassion far more effective and sustainable. The psychological shift is profound. Boundaries are no longer walls that isolate them, but gates that regulate energy flow, ensuring that what they give is conscious, deliberate, and life-affirming. In practice, this can look like declining invitations that feel draining, stepping away from emotionally toxic relationships, limiting exposure to certain environments, or even creating small rituals to recharge after social or emotional interactions. Each act, though seemingly small, reinforces the sense of ownership over one's own emotional and mental space. The resulting freedom is exhilarating. There is a sense of sovereignty, of reclaiming the parts of themselves that were long surrendered to others, and a newfound confidence in their ability to navigate life on their own terms. The world may push back, but the soul rejoices. The empath who once feared being labeled selfish now understands that their well-being is the foundation for all meaningful connections. They engage with others fully, not out of compulsion, but out of choice, and this choice is radically empowering. In essence, setting boundaries transforms the empath from a passive participant in life's emotional currents into an active navigator, steering their energy where it is most needed while maintaining a protective, glowing space around their own spirit. The world may resist the emergence of this newfound self-discipline, but for the healed empath, it is a victory of self-respect, clarity, and profound liberation. A freedom that once seemed impossible, yet once claimed, becomes a source of immense strength and inner peace. For many empaths, the word loneliness has long carried a weight of fear and discomfort, because living as a deeply sensitive person often means feeling disconnected or misunderstood by the people around them. From a young age, empaths may have learned to mask their feelings or to overextend themselves in the company of others in order to feel a sense of belonging, often at the cost of their own emotional stability. But there is a profound truth that emerges when an empath begins to heal. Solitude is not a punishment or a void to be feared. It is a gateway, a sacred space where true growth and self-realization occur. Carl Jung spoke of this process as individuation, the journey of becoming one's own person, separate from the expectations, judgments, and influences of the collective world. For a healed empath, learning to be alone does not mean isolation in despair. It means creating the mental and emotional space to integrate their experiences, reflect on the energies they have absorbed, and cultivate a relationship with themselves that is unshakable and authentic. In this silence, away from the constant input of other people's emotions, the empath begins to discern which feelings are truly their own and which belong to others, and this discernment is transformative. Loneliness, once a source of anxiety, becomes a teacher, revealing patterns, insights, and truths that can only emerge in the quiet. The most powerful empaths are those who can thrive alone, not because they are indifferent to the world, but because they have mastered the art of inner alignment. Solitude allows for reflection on choices, relationships, and personal boundaries, offering clarity that is often impossible in the middle of emotional noise. In this space, creativity blossoms, intuition deepens, and self-awareness expands, because there is finally room to listen to one's own voice rather than being drowned in the chorus of external emotions. Moreover, solitude gives the healed empath the freedom to process past experiences fully, to acknowledge pain, joy, resentment, or anger without judgment, and to release what no longer serves them. It becomes a laboratory of the soul where they experiment with emotional alchemy, turning past wounds into wisdom and sensitivity into strength. Importantly, this process also redefines the relationship the empath has with others. By thriving alone, they are no longer dependent on external validation or constant companionship to feel complete. They engage with people from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, giving generously when it aligns with their energy and stepping back without guilt when it does not. This independence is often misunderstood by those who expect empaths to be endlessly available or overly accommodating, but it is precisely this self-sufficiency that allows the healed empath to offer the deepest kind of presence, authentic, grounded, and intentional. In essence, learning to be alone becomes an act of liberation, a radical reclaiming of one's own inner landscape. The moments of silence, reflection, and stillness are not empty, they are charged with potential, offering the empath a rare intimacy with themselves that informs every relationship, decision, and creative endeavor moving forward. Far from being lonely in the negative sense, the healed empath experiences a profound companionship with their own mind and heart, a relationship built on understanding, patience, and self-compassion. Over time, this practice transforms loneliness from something feared into a sacred ritual of growth, allowing empaths to emerge not only more resilient and self-aware, but more capable of navigating the emotional currents of life with grace and clarity. They learn to stand alone and, in doing so, to stand strong, radiating a sense of inner light that is both magnetic and stabilizing to those around them. The solitude that once seemed like a curse now becomes a cornerstone of their power, a reminder that the deepest wisdom, the most authentic joy, and the truest self are often discovered in the quiet moments when the world is held at arm's length and the soul is allowed to breathe, reflect, and integrate fully into the person they were always meant to become. For most empaths, life begins with the belief that their sensitivity is a weakness, a burden that makes them vulnerable to being overwhelmed, manipulated, or taken advantage of. From absorbing the moods of others to feeling the weight of emotional currents that most people cannot perceive, empaths often grow up thinking that their gift is a liability, something to hide or suppress in order to survive. But the uncomfortable truth for those who have healed is radically different. Empathy is not a burden, it is a source of extraordinary power, a conscious tool that can be wielded with precision, intention, and clarity. Healed empaths understand that their sensitivity does not have to dictate their reality, rather it can guide them, inform them, and elevate them when approached with awareness and discipline. This mastery begins with choice. Unlike unhealed empaths who react reflexively to every emotional stimulus, the healed empath learns to decide when to engage, when to withdraw, and when to offer compassion. They recognize that not every emotion is theirs to carry, and that choosing to extend empathy does not make them weak, it makes them strategic, discerning, and deeply human. In this way, the empath transforms from a passive recipient of emotional currents into an active participant in the energetic world around them, turning what once felt like a liability into a superpower. This shift can be uncomfortable for both the empath and those around them. People accustomed to unconsciously influencing or depending on the empath may feel unsettled or even intimidated when the empath no longer absorbs, accommodates, or bends to every expectation. What once was automatic is now deliberate, and this clarity can be challenging for others to comprehend. The healed empath moves through interactions with a sense of grounded presence, fully aware of the impact they have and the boundaries they uphold, and this awareness radiates confidence and calm that is difficult to ignore. It is a quiet yet undeniable power, one that stems not from aggression or dominance, but from mastery over one's own sensitivity and the conscious decision to engage with the world on their own terms. Moreover, this empowerment is deeply liberating. The healed empath no longer suffers under the weight of unwanted emotions or the pressure to constantly please, and in that liberation, they experience a kind of freedom that is transformative. They can extend kindness and compassion without sacrificing themselves, offer insight without being manipulated, and navigate relationships with clarity rather than confusion. Their emotional intelligence becomes a tool for connection and understanding rather than a trap of overwhelm and anxiety. Importantly, empathy as power does not mean detachment or coldness, it means presence, discernment, and responsibility. The healed empath knows the difference between being present for someone and being consumed by them, between offering support and losing themselves in service. This conscious approach allows them to operate in life with both sensitivity and strength, a combination that is rare and, at times, disarming to those who do not understand it. In essence, what healed empaths become is not just emotionally intelligent, but energetically sovereign. They stand in their own clarity, radiating a sense of light and control that signals both self-mastery and deep understanding. The world may resist, misunderstand, or even fear this power because it challenges the assumptions that sensitivity equals vulnerability, that compassion equals submission, and that being highly attuned to emotions means being weak. In reality, the healed empath has learned the ultimate lesson: their gift is a choice, a conscious tool that allows them to navigate life with awareness, resilience, and profound impact. This is the uncomfortable truth. Empathy is not something to carry reluctantly or conceal, it is something to wield intentionally. Something that elevates the empath beyond the ordinary. Something that, once fully embraced, can never be taken away. The moment an empath steps into this understanding, they stop apologizing for their sensitivity and start recognizing it as the most powerful compass they have, guiding them through the world with precision, grace, and unshakable presence. It is here, in this mastery, that the healed empath discovers not only the depth of their own strength, but the true meaning of what it is to feel, to connect, and to live without compromise.